So, this lesson is this is actually a teaching lesson where you will have to do more listening so that you can understand the concepts effectively. The purpose of this lesson is for me to teach you to understand that there are various things that you need to consider when we think about the moon and the phases of the moon that we are able to see. The first thing is always to remember the perspectives of the moon. What we see here on Earth is what's different than what's happening in actual space. We may see 8 moon phases. However, we're just seeing various aspects of the moon depending on the angle at which the light is hitting the moon in its orbit around Earth. So here's the things that you need to know. We're going to start with the new moon. The new moon is the beginning of any lunar phase or any lunar cycle. A cycle being something that repeats over and over again. So lunar representation of the sun is another word for the moon. When we're thinking about the moon and its phases, we always have to consider the sunlight, right? So the moon doesn't get its light it only gets its light from the sun, as we all do. So the sun has to be a big part of any type of model or diagram that you draw when you're thinking about the lunar phase or the moon cycle or the moon phases. So always consider where the sun is with respect to where the moon is, okay? So in this animation, I found this animation which will help in me talking and explaining what is happening. And so I'm going to get started. So we have the sunlight here. All of these are different. Obviously, the sun in perspective would be a lot larger, and there's a lot of light coming in this direction from the sun. So to start off the moon cycle, or the moon phases, we always start off with a new moon, and you'll see that these titles change as I play. When I start the animation, I'm going to start it at a very consistent rate so that I can stop and pause and explain things to you. But here is the start of a moon phase. It's 0 hours, no time has passed, and there is no illumination, meaning from our perspective here, right, here we are on Earth, from our perspective, we don't see the moon, right? All we see is, we see nothing, no parts of the moon, because the light is shining on the opposite side of the moon as we are looking at the moon at the beginning of a moon cycle or a moon phase. So there's 0 hours that have passed, there's no illumination, and here we go. We're gonna start the animation, and as the moon starts to make its way into its first phase, as you can see, we are now in the waxing crescent. We're going to get further into the waxing crescent, but about day 2, a little bit over 1 day, and we're at 4.8% illuminated by the light as it's moving in its orbit around the Earth. And depending on where we are, we can see the part of the moon that's being lit up right here. Right? There's still that dark part, that inner dark part that's facing us. But now, as the moon moves at a different angle pertaining to the light of the sun, we can see a small glimpse of the moon, which is illuminated here. This is what we see on Earth, but this is actually what's happening in space. That same side is dark because it's facing the Earth, and there's no light coming from the Earth. The light is coming from outside from the sun, right? Outside of the orbit of the moon. So there is no light being projected here. It's being projected on the same side. And from our perspective, we are starting to see small glimpses of the moon in this specific angle, right? 2 days in, we are at 4.8%. We're going to get started again. So for a full waxing crescent, it usually takes about roughly 3 days for a full crescent to be present. Mind you that as the moon starts to the new moon starts to move away from its position in front of the Earth while the sunlight is reflecting in our direction, we will start to see bits and pieces of a waxing crescent until about the third day, where we'll see a full waxing crescent. And as I press play again, we're going to go quickly into the next phase of the moon, because this is within the first few hours of the new moon transitioning into this phase. So we're about 3 days in, 15 hours, and I'm going to keep going. Again, this is the angle or the perspective that is happening here. So it's the same side of the moon that's dark, but the lit side is now visible a little bit to us from this angle. We see this part of the moon from this angle where we are on Earth. This is what we see. Okay. All right. We're going to quickly go into about 4 days in, we're still in the waxing crescent, and then we switch as soon as we come off that crescent. About day 6, we are now in the first quarter. I'm going to press pause, which is where this is now we were at phase 1 at the new moon, phase 2 at the waxing crescent. Waxing means to grow bigger, right? So we are now at the waxing, or the first quarter, which is where half the moon, the half that's lit by the sun side, is visible to us. We can see a first quarter moon, and we are at about 7 days in. We're at 52% illuminated, so we're about halfway there, what we see from this perspective. All right, and then we're going to start moving into the next phase immediately. Day 8, right away, we move into the waxing gibbous, where the moon becomes more and more illuminated from this angle. We're about 84%, 10 days in from this angle. Again, the sun lights. There's nothing blocking the sun from illuminating on the moon at this angle. We're still here as the moon makes its way around Earth. So from this angle, this perspective, we see a larger portion of the moon being illuminated about day 10. And as it moves further into its orbit, we're going to eventually see, I don't know if you've guessed it, but I'm going to keep going. About day 10, day 11, day 12, we are about to see a full moon, right? About 99 or 100%. So 2 weeks in, or 14 days in, we've moved from phase 1, which is the new moon, phase 2, the waxing crescent, phase 3, the first quarter, phase 4, the waxing gibbous, growing, right? Waxing means growing. From this angle, we saw most of the moon being illuminated. Again, the sun was coming in this direction. And as it moves into, yes, maybe the shadow of the Earth, we get to see a little bit more of the illuminated side because the sun is shining this direction. And so the sun is still hitting the moon full on. And what we see, or what we think we see, is 100% of the moon. But we're still seeing that same half of the moon. If I drag this, I don't want to move it now, but if I drag this all the way around, it would still be the same side that's being lit up by the sun and the same side that is still being opposite of being lit by the sun. So we are about day 14. So if we are at 14 days, 2 weeks into the lunar cycle. And we are on phase 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, we are on phase 5 of the moon cycle, and we have 3 more to go. So I'm going to start the animation. So if we divide that, right, that's about, we're almost 14 days in. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. So we're just a little under, just about 3 days, a little under 3 days. We're not at 100%. We're almost at day 15 with the 100%. But we're about 3, it's a little bit more than 3 days for each moon phase. And now immediately after moving out of this shadow, right, it is still on its way in its orbit. We're about day 15. We start to see a waning. Waning means to get smaller. A waning gibbous. We are now seeing the moon move back into its orbit as it makes its way back toward the sun. And so we're going to see less and less of that moon as it moves back in its orbit in front of the sunlight. So we're at the waning gibbous. We are in phase 6. And phase 6, each phase lasts about 3-ish days. So day 15, day 16, day 17, day 18, and about day 19 going into day 20, we're going to start to see, this is that gibbous leaving from the full moon. That gibbous, we're seeing more and more of that waning gibbous of the side of the moon coming back into our perspective. We're starting to see that same angle, right? A little bit more still being visible, but we're starting to see that dark side of the moon because there's no light coming from this angle. All the light is coming from this specific angle. So we're at the waning gibbous about day 20. And about day 21, we will move into our third quarter moon. Sorry, I didn't pause it fast enough. We're in the third quarter, right? Where the moon is again lined up horizontally, right? Or lined up vertically. I'm sorry, not horizontally. Vertically with the earth. And so the half of the moon that we can see is lit up by the sun from this angle where we are, and the other half is not. So we see a third quarter of the moon. And remember, waning is as we make our way back toward the sun. So we are seeing less and less, or it's getting smaller. It seems like it's getting smaller as it moves its way back toward the sun. So this is the third quarter moon, and about 22 days in. I'm gonna keep going. And then, yep, immediately we start moving into that waning crescent, and that waning crescent will take a few days. We're at day 22. Now we are at day 24, 25. Remember, about 3 days each to get to the next phase of the moon. And now we're officially in the waning crescent of the moon, and we're back at the 12%, about 12, 15% of the moon. From this angle, we can see just this small piece of the moon being lit up. Because now, again, we are moving into the ending phase of the moon. This is the 7th phase. I'm sorry, the waning crescent is phase 7, or phase 8, I'm sorry. Phase 6 was the third quarter. Phase 5 was the, 8, 7, 6, I'm sorry. Yes, 6 was the waning gibbous. Third quarter was the phase 7. And now we are in the final phase of the lunar cycle. If you read through your presentation, you know each lunar cycle takes about 27.5 days-ish. And so we're at day 26. All we need is another day and a half for it to make its way to end its cycle and begin a new cycle. So let's go ahead and finish that off. Less and less of the moon is being illuminated until we get to, yes, that 28th day or 27th day, 27.5 day. We get just about from our angle to seeing the nothing again, right? We can see a small, very small glimpse of it depending on the time of day. And we are almost at the 3-month marker of it not being illuminated, right? So about 30 days. They say it takes about 29.5 or 27.5 days. And we're back in our new moon phase, which starts our lunar cycle all over again. All right. So phase 1, new moon. Phase 2, waxing crescent. Phase 3, first quarter. Phase 4, waxing gibbous. Phase 5, full moon. Phase 6, waning gibbous. Phase 7, third quarter. And phase 8 would be the waning crescent. Waxing means get larger, waning means get smaller. And again, we are still only ever seeing the dark side of the moon. It's always facing us. It's just what's being revealed as the moon orbits around the earth. And what we can see, this is what we see from Earth, but this is actually what's happening in space. This is a space view versus an Earth view. All right. I'm going to end this lesson here. Make sure you listen all the way through so you understand all parts of the moon phases. So when you are doing your practice sheet, you are understanding where a phase might be and how long each phase may take to be in completion. We know it's about 3.5 days, 4 days for each phase to complete itself. So consider that when you go into your practice worksheet, understanding that maybe on June 10th, if we were in a third quarter moon, what moon phase will we be in maybe by or back on June 1st, right? If this is June 10th, 3 days before that, 3 or 4 days before that would have been June 7th. 3 days before that would have been June 4th. And maybe 3 days before that would have been about June 1st. So at this stage, we would have been at the Waxing Gibbous, right? After first quarter would have been a Waxing Gibbous. So on June 1st, I might have been at a Waxing Gibbous. I would have been in the Waxing Gibbous phase on June 1st if I think from what I'm being asked from June 10th where I was, or moving forward, okay? All right, I'm going to end this lesson so it's not super long, but make sure you listen. This is key and important to you understanding everything you need to know about the moon phases. All right.